Gentlemen, we're going to call to order this seventh or eighth hearing of the Milton Board of Appeals on the H&W Apartments 40B application dealing with the Randolph Avenue site. My name is John Leonard. I'm chairman of the Board of Appeals. With me this evening and present for all the other hearings, to my immediate right, Board Member Virginia Donahue King, and to my immediate left, Board Member Jeffrey Mullen. When we last met, we were in the middle of a presentation by Janet Carter Bernardo, a registered professional engineer from Horsley Witten Group, and we ran out of time, so that Ms. Bernardo did not have a chance to finish her presentation. And so we're here this evening to listen to the rest of the presentation. And I believe that the applicant may have some rebuttal evidence regarding the traffic testimony that was introduced at the last hearing by Attorney Johanna Schneider on behalf of certain direct abutters to the project, and that was presented to the board by Kim Eric Hezavatarian, a PhD and traffic engineer, and Mr. Hezavatarian submitted a report to the board regarding his testimony on May 14th, 2015, which has been on file with the papers if anyone has wanted to look at it. So let's see where we are at the end of the rebuttal testimony and where we are in the process, and whether we need another hearing. I think we probably are going to need another hearing. And the suggested date is Monday, June 8th, which would be held here, Mary?
Yes.
Here in the Blue Conference Room. I know that's awfully short. I'd like to perhaps go out a little further, but there are a lot of complicating factors to this, and at least would like to get the evidence portion of this hearing over with, as well as making sure that any elected officials who wish to speak will have the opportunity to do so. At the last hearing, which was devoted to, I'll call it public speak, we had 12 or 13 members of the public who spoke. I understand that at least one member of the Board of Selectmen may want to speak. We did receive an email from Attorney Paul Kingston indicating that he wanted to be heard. And we'll just see where we are at the end of the hearing this evening, or whether we just need another date to finish up loose ends and hear from anyone else who wishes to speak. Likewise, if there's any other member of the public who wants to speak, we're delighted to hear them. But as everyone knows, we're approaching a June 19th deadline when we have to, absent an extension by agreement of all of the parties, we have to have this, the evidence portion of this case over. And I know I speak for my colleagues, we really don't want to approach that date with any degree of proximity. So with that as a overly long preamble, Attorney Schneider, welcome back to the Board of Appeals, and we'd be delighted to hear from your witness.
Thank you. As you pointed out, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Bernardo did attempt to begin her testimony at the last hearing. I think she's going to sort of start from scratch a little bit, refresh the board as to what she mentioned the last time, and then continue with her testimony, if that's
yeah, absolutely fine. Welcome back to the Board of Appeals. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much.
And I should say, Mr. Caggiano, are you content to sit back there, or you want to come up at the table so you can take notes? Or any other attorney present who wants to come up here and make themselves a little more comfortable, they're certainly free to do so. So welcome back to the board.
Hey, again, my name is Janet Carter Bernardo. I'm a professional engineer with the Horsley Witten Group. I have more than 25 years experience in civil site design. I have specialized in stormwater management for the majority of that time and working with environmental issues. I'm also vice chair of the Needham Community Council, the Needham Conservation Commission, sorry. I have done a number of peer reviews for other communities. I currently am working on 40B reviews in the town of Wenham for 60 units, in the town of Duxbury for a 40-unit development, Chelmsford for an 11-unit development. I worked on the Hendry's building for the town of Milton, which had 57 units, and I am currently working with the proponent on a project in Haverhill that has 62 units. I have reviewed the numerous comment letters and the plans that were revised April 15th, 2015, as well as the niche engineering peer review letter. And I've conducted 2 site visits, one with the Conservation Commission and the Zoning Board of Appeals, and another that was around the perimeter of the property. I basically I have a letter that is dated May 11th that you have received, I believe, and there's 2 main concerns. There's a number of site constraints and the functionality and safety from trying to put too much development on this small, very constrained site that has a significant amount of wetlands. It has, property lines. It has buffer zones, and my other concerns are with the wetlands themselves and the stormwater management design. As a matter of point, wetlands basically are functioning for, the Clean Water Act is there for our public health. The functions are directly related to the impacts to humans, dealing with clean water, aquifer protection, flood control, recharging water supplies, fish and wildlife habitat. The wetlands serve a valuable resource to people. That's kind of the goal. The buffer zone is also to protect the wetlands as that resource. So the Wetlands Protection Act holds a 100-foot buffer zone line. Many communities, as Milton has a 25-foot no disturb zone attached to that. And the Mass DEP frequently holds that 25-foot, have accepted that that is a standard protocol for having no disturb within the 25-foot, as it serves to protect the resource area. It helps with pollutant removal. It helps control erosion, stormwater recharge, as well as the wildlife habitat and providing a wildlife corridor. As far as the site constraints, the roadway appears particularly narrow coming across the large wetland for the amount of volume coming into that property. With the 90 units, their daily traffic numbers were over 400 vehicles per day. And according to the AASHTO Geometric Design Manual, typically a road would have at least be 30 feet wide to have that much traffic. And the road as proposed is 24 feet wide. Also, the sidewalk that's adjacent to that road there's no buffer between the road and people walking, the pedestrians with the bicycles, and having that safety corridor. They're proposing a 4-foot wide sidewalk. I would imagine 6 feet wide would be more appropriate at that point. I know that we talked about the traffic with Kim on the other night, and he had more comments regarding that. As far as the truck turning radius, they provided a sketch, the applicant provided a sketch that showed fire engines as well as trash, refuse trucks. It seemed to be that the trash removal trucks crossed over the lanes. Typically it's fine for the emergency vehicles to cross over lanes, safety first, and that's standard protocol. But routine trucks that are going into a development on a regular basis, when it's a new development.
Yes.
That will go on till about 8:15 this
And
evening.
it's lovely, isn't it?
It's your soundtrack.
But typically, you would not design traffic lanes that trucks would cross over. That is unusual. It's when it's a new development, we all know that trucks cross over the lanes, but that's not the design protocol. So you would imagine that when it's a new project, that they would not need to cross the lane. So therefore, they should be wider so that there's no crossing. And the conflicts between the routine trucks and emergency vehicles, you want to make sure that there's ample room, maneuverable room. They have noted that there's a forested buffer between the property line and the development, but in reality, there's a significant amount of grading around the top building. I believe that's building 1.
Yeah.
And so the grading means that all the trees that are between that building and the adjacent property line will need to be removed. So that seems to reduce the corridor for the wildlife habitat as well as the buffer from the adjacent homeowners. It would be important to maintain that 25-foot, if not a 50-foot, forested buffer to protect the wildlife habitat, to provide shading to minimize the heat effect of the buildings and the additional impervious area coverage. The vegetation along that vegetated area slows the water runoff, it enhances infiltration, and it stabilizes the soils. So they can regrade the area. It's right at the moment, it showed as a steep grading, but they will have to remove all of the trees to do that grading. And I would hope that they would at least replant trees, but it'd be preferred to leave the trees that are fully mature at this stage. The applicant is proposing a number of waivers of the design standards for the parking area, including the landscaped areas and trees. I would suggest that the landscaped areas can be used for stormwater mitigation. They can be used for snow storage. Trees reduce the heat effect that when we've all walked across a parking lot in the summertime and appreciate how hot it can get. That's what the trees and the shading coverage is for, to reduce that. That coverage also, when it rains on a hot pavement, the trees, by shading it, reduce the temperature of the water, the runoff, because right now it hits the hard, hot pavement, goes into the storm drain, eventually comes out into this wetlands and raises the temperature of the wetland system, which immediately impacts the fish and the wildlife, and particularly the fish, obviously. I would recommend denying the requested waiver for the design standards because there are so many aspects in the design standards that are critical to the development. The project as designed appears to lack space for snow storage. There's 4 areas shown at the moment for snow storage, the largest of which is adjacent to the property line of 11 Reed Street. The existing grades in that area are very steep, and as the snow melts, it will just drain right onto the property at 11 Reed Street. That house is not too far from the property line, and it could definitely cause flooding for that homeowner. They could definitely be significantly impacted by the snow melt, and I would recommend relocation of this particular snow storage area.
Is there anywhere else on the site to put that snow storage area, though?
The site is very tight as it's shown right now.
Yes, yes.
Between the parking not having any landscape
I understand.
areas,
Yes.
the adjacent wetland system, and the steep slopes, it's very difficult to find places to put that snow. And the concern about dropping the snow into the wetlands, as we know from the February storm that we all suffered through, it was a big deal just to put the snow in the ocean in the end. That was, kind of an active, legislator had to go through. It's not a minor incident to put snow in a wetland. You're concerned about the road salt, the sand, the litter, the debris, the automotive pollutants that threaten our public health and in the environment when that's deposited into wetlands. So you don't want it to be in a situation where their only place to drop it and to push it, and as it goes pushed and it goes down the side slopes, means that it immediately impacts the wetlands and the different bits that are in there.
How do you address the applicant's position that if the snowfall was so large that they had difficulty storing it according to the rules and regulations on site, they'd just truck it off site?
Well, that is an option that some business owners did this past February. It's a very, very expensive proposition. And I would recommend that there's a bond or something, there's an account that is available for the association so that it is constantly being kept to at a level to be able to remove all that snow. Because as soon as there's no money, it's just gonna go into the wind.
Are there land areas in the vicinity that are generally available for private landowners to dump excessive amounts of snow, or is
I
that
know
a
that
difficult
some,
task?
yeah, it's a difficult, I haven't looked around the area, but I know that there are some, in some instances, there might be a construction site nearby, there might be a movie theater nearby. I'm not sure for this particular, I haven't looked in the vicinity, if there is something that is a flat area that either the town owns or that a developer owns or somebody owns that is very willing to allow others to stockpile. I mean, I know in Westwood, when they were building the Westwood Crossings, is that what it's called, the Westwood Crossings? They were allowing a lot of the businesses to put snow in the middle of their construction area because they had the space. But once it's all built, they won't be doing that. You know, the Targets, the big box stores may allow businesses to put snow there, but not everybody. You know, so it's hard. They have to make a deal with somebody along the way. So they may be able to do that, but it's still expensive. And it takes a long time to move all that snow.
And you assume if there's that much snow around, everybody's trying to do
Everybody's
the
got
same
snow.
thing.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
No.
interrupt your testimony. Why don't you continue?
No problem at all. And part of the buildings right at the moment are, and there's also a wall that's within the 25-foot, the buildings are on the 25-foot line. Some of them kind of outstretch into there. And it's just very difficult to construct a building that close to the 25-foot line. So I would definitely encourage them being pulled outside of the 25-foot to allow room for the footings to be poured, knowing that they're going to keep the trash out. I mean, no disturb is no disturb. It's not temporary disturb. It's no disturb. It seems like the roadway crossing of the wetlands is just shy of the 5,000 square feet trigger. It's 146 square feet shy of it.
You have a sense it was designed to be just shy of the limit?
Well, it's a typical practice that everybody, I mean, that's the goal, is to be less than 5,000 square feet. Every engineer will tell you that. That is definitely the plan of attack going into something, and I can appreciate that. That I would have done the same thing. However, because it's so close, it seems like if they go over that threshold, the Conservation Commission can order an enforcement order, can have a cease and desist while they get their necessary permits. There's a number of permits that are triggered as soon as they go over the 5,000 square feet, including a MEPA ENF, the Mass DEP Water Quality Cert, the Army Corps of Engineers Clean Water Act certification, a detailed wildlife habitat evaluation is required, and as far as the culvert being 10 feet wide, if it's considered a public roadway, Mass DOT is required to approve that culvert. So as soon as the culvert is 10 feet wide, which theirs is proposed at this moment, requires, and if that becomes a public roadway, it requires Mass DOT's approval. At the last public hearing we were at, you had asked us to try to put together a plan to try to reconfigure the layout and avoid some of these conflicts. And I tried really hard. I spent a lot of time.
Tell us you failed.
I did.
You
I
did.
failed. I failed. To hold the number of units, to hold the setbacks to the buffer zone, to the setbacks to property lines, to have room for snow storage, to have landscaping and stormwater management. There's not enough space on that area that's buildable, that's upland, clean upland space. And I couldn't make it work keeping the number of units that they have proposed. As far as the stormwater and the hydrology, the 10-foot culvert that's beneath the roadway, I would ask that it's verified that it's sized adequately. There's an entire watershed area that goes to that wetland system. The water will need to flow unhindered through that culvert when it's constructed. You don't want it to have a tailwater effect and hold additional, by having it back up into the adjacent properties behind the culvert. It could raise the flooding in those back properties. I would recommend that the applicant perform a hydraulic study to determine if flooding and ponding will affect the homes along Randolph Avenue or downgrading of the site. As far as the stormwater facility being proposed beneath the building, infiltration systems, I definitely agree with. I think that's a good idea, but placing them under the buildings, I think is a bad idea. Mass DEP's stormwater handbook says that they should be a minimum of 20 feet from any building foundation, any slab.
Do you have the citation of that at hand there, or do you not? It may be in your report.
I know that's in the Mass Stormwater Handbook, under subsurface structures. Perforated pipes are subsurface structures, very similar to the ones that are proposed for this, and they function similar to infiltration trenches. So in the Mass Stormwater Handbook, there is a section for infiltration trenches and subsurface structures, and it has setback requirements of 20 feet for a slab, to a slab. There's problems with locating beneath the building there for the possibilities of repairs, difficulty of routine maintenance, and the continuous percolation of roof runoff under the buildings, which could possibly undermine the footings of the buildings. I would recommend that the board require the applicant to locate the stormwater infiltration systems at least 20 feet from any building foundation consistent with the Mass Stormwater Handbook. And as this development is a new development, there's no need to kind of cut corners on it. I mean, it's a fresh piece of land. This is not a redevelopment project. This is virgin territory, and the design should be done in accordance with Mass DEP stormwater standards, in accordance with the town of Milton standards, and good engineering practices. So I would definitely recommend that that we're not cutting corners to fit something in, kind of shoehorn something in there.
By the way, you do cover that issue in paragraph 10 of your report that you filed with the board, and you indeed do have the citation to the handbook right there for us.
Good, thank you.
So thank
I'm
you very
glad.
much. Why don't you, have you completed your
I'm done.
presentation?
I am,
Okay,
I'm
well,
done.
That's
I
fine.
mean, my letter was lengthier. I didn't think you needed to hear every last detail that was in that letter, but I wanted to hit the main point.
No, that's great. We appreciate very much. That's very helpful. We've all read your letter, and your presentation is helpful on focusing on what you believe to be the more important parts of your testimony, particularly for us lawyers who don't have an engineering background.
Stormwater is always an exciting component of
And-
every project.
We could never suffer our way through engineering school. We would be failures. So thank you very much. Let me see if my colleagues have any questions. Mr. Mullen, do you have any questions?
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, I don't, I don't have my drawings with me. I apologize, but there's a section of the wetlands replication area that's being replaced within the buffer zone. What do you say about that?
Well, typically replication areas need to be hydraulically connected to the wetland that they're replicating and that they're adjacent to. It almost has to go within the 25-foot buffer zone. That's, the place was relatively logical.
But doesn't it create another buffer zone for the new wetland
Yes, it creates another buffer zone for the new wetland.
in which the building is located?
Yes,
So what do you say to that?
yes, that's a problem. I agree with you on that one. I hadn't actually thought about it, though, but I think that's true. It has created it's a problem. The buffer zone to any wetland system is critical. It, as I noted before, it assists with erosion and with filtering out the pollutants that are going into that wetland system, but the replicated wetland becomes a wetland. That's the idea of it. The location of it made sense, but yes, it has a buffer zone of its own.
That's my only question.
Mrs. King?
No, I don't have any.
Okay, well, thank you, Ms. Bernardo. I don't have any questions. Mr. Casciano, do you have any questions you'd like to pose? Or?
No, I do not have any questions.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure I'm not missing anybody out there. I don't think I am. Thank you very much for your testimony, Ms. Bernardo. Ms. Schneider, could I just ask you one question about
Sure.
the TIP traffic study, which was filed?
Yes, and Mr.
reviewed-
Hazarvardian is actually here with us. If
Oh,
you have any
there he
substantive
is.
follow-up questions for him, he'll be better at answering them for
Oh,
sure.
that's great. Well, do you intend to?
Only if the board has follow-up questions for him. I understood that some portion of tonight might be rebuttal by the applicant to the testimony of Mr. Hazarvardian, so we thought it made sense to have him on hand if there were any points of
Well, that's great.
clarification.
He's certainly welcome here. Mr. Hazavari, could I just ask you, at the last, why don't you come up here, sir, so we'll have this properly on television. And why don't you just tell us your name and your professional association?
Good evening, my name is Kim Hazavardian, traffic engineer with TEP LLC.
Great, welcome back to the Board of Appeals. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I did review my notes, and we did have questions regarding your proposed redesign of the access to this site. And you remember you described how perhaps you should have 3 lanes, and you described the width of the lanes and the sidewalks and all of that. And we lawyers on the board, but not traffic engineers, wanted to know whether you were going to be able to graphically demonstrate your proposed.
We did a plan, did you bring copies?
No, I thought you were bringing it after I
No,
signed off on it.
No, we have one, and
You do?
we can provide it.
Okay. Well, I was hoping to have it here because, you know,
I don't think I've-
so that Dr. Delasky could take a look at it, and if he had any comments on it, he could provide us comments. But
Sure, I can easily provide that, and I can actually describe it very, very well as I sit here, and I can provide it by email to whoever you like.
okay,
Do you want to do that? No, I want to see and print it?
Yeah, we can email it right now.
Right.
you mean you have it electronically with
Yes,
you?
we
Yeah.
sure do.
Well, the wonders of modern science. Mrs. Fitzgerald suggests if you can email that to us, she'll run upstairs and make multiple copies, so we'll have it at this hearing.
Okay, should I do I don't think I can email and do the description at the same time.
No,
Why
why
don't we
don't you
wait until
email
Kevin
it?
prints it out?
Sure.
You email it to
She's
Mary
gonna
right now.
give her- She's going to give her your email, her email
Mr.
address.
Chairman, were there other questions related to either of the experts' testimony? Because I would just like to say a few things to wrap up sort of the testimony that we've provided on behalf of the abutters. Now might be a convenient time to do it. or-
Well, that may be. Let's see where we go.
Touch
Pardon?
that note.
I just have one question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. O'Connor, yes.
When we had this testimony about the traffic, there was discussion about about school buses, school children being picked up in the site, and about whether or not there was sufficient turnarounds for school buses. And I just have news from the school department today that the school buses don't go into private property on Milton. So they would be doing pickups on Randolph. and drop-offs on Randolph Ave for the kids in that project, which is an unbelievable safety concern, it seems to me.
Where do they pick up right now, do you know? On Randolph Avenue, there's homes there.
I don't know. But would that then, in a design of the entrance, would you then be looking at a place for, you know, school buses to pull in or kids to congregate to be picked up at the bottom of that access drive? I mean, would that be a manner?
Normally, I would want to see whatever's done, a place for the kids to wait away from the travel way. In other words, not right at the edge of the street. At my house, for example, my kids tend to wait inside my property and only then go down to the street. On a road like Randolph Avenue, that's what I prefer, something where they wait inside, and even if the bus stops on Randolph Avenue, the kids are not waiting right immediately adjacent to Randolph Avenue. Two things can happen. One is that you can have run-off-the-road type encroachments, or children's behavior close to the road.
So I just was wondering whether that would sort of impact kind of the design of the exit onto Randolph, that you'd want to have, along with sort of, we talked about whether or not there should be a left-hand turning lane or something like that. There also going to have to be dedicated space for children to congregate as well?
I would want to see something set back away from the edge of travel way where the children would congregate. It would be a pedestrian enhancement as opposed to a vehicular enhancement.
Okay.
Kim, have you emailed that to Mary yet?
Nope, I can't do
Oh,
two
sorry.
things. I'm very bad at multitasking. It's even questionable whether I can get this technology to work, but I think I will.
Well, I could ask Janet a quick question, too.
Sure, why don't you do that?
In the 40Bs that you've worked on in the suburbs, have you seen stormwater systems underneath buildings?
No, the only place I've seen even considering putting it under the building is in the city of Boston. And basically, Boston Water and Sewer has asked certain sections of the city that are particularly old, that are built on timber piles.
Oh, yeah.
They
right.
want to keep the groundwater high under those, for the timber piles, because they start to decay. So they've been asking all of the businesses, if there's any renovations to the business, that they infiltrate their water in some way. Sometimes that's in the sidewalk with direct kind of
Rain, yeah.
pushing it, there's a word, drilling it into the sidewalk. It's like a point source or something right in. But, and sometimes that happens under the buildings, and I've seen it for like flood control if the building's on piles, but not for actual stormwater management outside of the city of Boston.
Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Doctor, are you having any luck?
No, it's going to take a few
Okay,
minutes.
so what?
I just emailed it to you as well. I
Oh.
don't know. Did you get it?
Okay,
You're
Thank
done.
you. Thank you.
All right, that's embarrassing for both of us. That I know my way around an iPhone so well, and that you couldn't pull off the technology. You're an engineer. Come on. Let the lawyer show you up.
that's fine. Thank you very much. I hope when Mary comes back, she's bringing cookies as well. But, that may not be the case. So you don't have anything further to provide in terms of traffic analysis, is that true?
That's
Okay.
correct.
So why don't we do this while, I'm sorry?
Can I ask you a question?
Of course you,
You're going to permit us?
yes.
Oh, is that what you were going to say? I'm sorry.
No, if you have a question, Mr. Mullen, you certainly can propose it.
All right.
To whom are you addressing the question?
Dr. Kim.
To Dr. Kim, okay.
So, it's a constructability analysis question. So we've been looking at this, this cross-section on the, on the access road for quite a while. And I think people have a pretty good idea of how it works and how much wetland area it displaces. It seems to me that, well, a question I have is whether or not you've taken a look at, and whether Whether you can, or anybody maybe on your team, took a look at whether it can actually be built in the envelope that's been proposed. Because there's a temporary and a permanent displacement. And I'm interested in whether or not anybody's made a judgment as to whether the temporary displacement is adequate for the type of facility that's being proposed, particularly given the hill that it's being built on.
Yeah, I was
my
definitely
question.
concerned that the width that they have provided for that temporary construction, because it's basically just 2 feet on either side of those retaining walls, whether that's adequate or not. My understanding was that the applicant said that there was a response from a contractor that said it was feasible. I would suggest that you get your own letter from a contractor that says that it's feasible. It's pretty tight, and I would think most likely, it's not so tight that, like, it's not like there's a building there. Like, when you're working in the city of Boston and you physically cannot move past that line, there is just a wetland. So it's open space in a machine operator's mind that if they nudge over a few feet, no one's gonna really know. But it is a concern that they having to stay within that area, and it will be very difficult.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, great. Why don't we then suspend with your portion of the hearing at the present time? Are you prepared to present Dr. Julaski's rebuttal?
Can I
or-
just actually, may I make a suggestion?
Sure you
There are a
can.
couple of things that I want to add to our substantive testimony and kind of put a fine point on a couple of the things. Before we transition to rebuttal testimony, it may make sense
Okay.
for me to just say a few things very briefly. And I guess we can circle back to the drawing if Ms. Fitzgerald is able to print out what I emailed to her. I first want
The
to.
floor is yours. Go ahead.
Thank you. And I want to thank the board for indulging us and allowing us to participate in this process. As you know, I do represent 2 direct abutters to the site who are very concerned about what is proposed. I think that what we've heard over the 2 nights of testimony that we've been allowed to present, that there are really a host of issues here that are the direct result of the density of the project and how the site is laid out. I think there's no question that this is a very constrained site, in part because there's a significant amount of wetlands, and in larger part just because it's a very large development. As a result of these constraints, there are some serious impacts to safety, to site functionality, and to wetland resources. As direct abutters to the site, my clients are particularly concerned about the insufficiency of access for emergency vehicles. We've introduced Kim's testimony that given the tightness of the site, and Janet's testimony to that point as well, that given the tightness of the site, there are likely to be conflicts between emergency vehicles and more routine truck traffic, recycling trucks, trash trucks, moving sites on the site. We've also seen testimony that as designed, the project requires significant extended backup movement by emergency vehicles. I understand the fire chief's position, if there's an emergency, he'll get in, he'll get out. But I think we have to think about the other vehicles and pedestrians on the site when a fire truck or other significant emergency equipment is trying to back up 300 or 400 feet. These are unsafe conditions, and these really are the direct result of the project's failure to include a second emergency vehicle driveway. In that regard, I want to bring something up, and I apologize if someone else has already raised this, but I did want to flag a few relevant sections of the state fire code, which is 527 CMR 1, which as of January 1st adopted the 2012 NFPA code. The first section that I'd like to bring to the board's attention is section 18.2.3.3 regarding multiple access roads. That provision requires that states that more than one fire department access road shall be provided when it is determined by the jurisdictional authority, and that can be the fire department or another jurisdictional entity, that access by a single road could be impaired by vehicle congestion, condition of terrain, climatic conditions, or other factors that could limit access. Based on everything that we know about the way that this site is laid out, it strikes us that this is clearly a case calling out for a determination that a second access road is needed. I'd also like to point the board's attention to section 18.2.3.2.2, which provides.
Are you going to favor us with copies of these at some point in time?
I will not,
tonight,
I
but-
will not tonight. I understand that previously I'd seen Mr. Mullen suggest that the board could take notice of these provisions. I'm happy to provide them to the board in hard copy later this week if you would like them. The provision I was just referencing, though, provides that fire department access roads shall be provided such that any portion of the facility or any portion of an exterior wall of the first story of the building is located not more than 150 feet from fire department access roads as measured by an approved route around the exterior of a building. By our calculations, and I did have Janet take a look at it, there are portions of the building that are more than 150 feet away from the sole access road on this property. So we would suggest that some additional investigation into this point is warranted. Moving on to the wetlands issue that Janet just finished speaking about, we're also quite concerned with the applicant's request that the board grant a waiver of the local wetlands bylaw. The project entails significant alteration of wetland resources, particularly in terms of encroachment into the 25-foot no disturbance zone established by the town's own bylaw. Impairment of these wetland resources will have consequences on wildlife habitat and, more importantly, on public health. As Janet pointed out, the reason that we protect wetlands is to keep people safe. It removes pollutants from the water and it controls the flow of water from the site. In some of their materials, the applicant had suggested that it could try to reduce the number of parking spaces on the site in order to shift the development further away from the 25-foot no disturb zone. But we heard testimony a couple weeks ago from Mr. Hazavardian saying that there may already be problems with insufficient parking on the site and, resulting from the parking waiver that they've requested. So I don't see how it's feasible for them to further reduce parking. I mean, this is a trade-off based on the constraints of the site, and in our opinion, it's a trade-off that just doesn't work. I also understand we have been monitoring the CONCOM process, and I understand that the CONCOM has expressed concerns regarding the wetlands impacts of this project. So we would respectfully request that the board not exercise its authority to grant a waiver of the local wetlands bylaw. As Janet pointed out, we're also concerned that there has not been enough information provided about the hydrology of the site, in particular whether or not this project is going to result in flooding and ponding of neighboring properties. I believe that Chuck Turner, the town's peer reviewer from Mitch Engineering, suggested
Scott.
Scott, was,
Chuck's the city council.
is he still around?
He certainly
He
is.
sure is, yeah. I've got Boston on my mind, sorry.
Sorry,
This is
different,
Scott.
different person.
Scott Turner, I think, suggested that the applicant be required to provide a hydrological study. To answer this question, we would echo that request. Bottom line, as you heard from our experts, there are a range of issues created by this project, but I don't think that any of these issues are really insurmountable. In almost every instance, these issues could be easily remedied by shrinking the size of the development. Shrinking the size of the development would ensure adequate protection of the wetland resources. It would prevent encroachment of the project into the buffer zone. It would free up space on the site for the proposed stormwater facility, which, as we've heard tonight, placing under a building, not a good idea for a whole bunch of reasons. And it would also create adequate space for on-site removal of on-site snow removal management. Again, there are issues with, they're just trying to do too much on this site, and there's not enough room for it. Shrinking the size of the development would also enable further reduction of vehicles at the site. This would alleviate traffic flow issues in and around the site and also the potential parking shortage that Mr. Hazavardian talked about. To the extent that there are concerns about trip generation from this project, trips generated leaving and causing additional congestion on Randolph Ave, shrinking the number of units and shrinking the number of cars associated with those units would address that problem. Shrinking the size of the development would also create additional maneuvering space for emergency vehicles. If we're talking about less intensive development, and we're talking about smaller development footprints, we've got space on the site then for fire trucks and ambulances and everybody else to be moving around safely. And shrinking the development footprint would also reduce deforestation at the rear of the site. As Janet pointed out, in order to put these two buildings on the site, there's a significant amount of clearing, particularly along the property line, that's required. We could avoid that as well. I want to let the board know that my clients are not opposed to a 40B development on this site, but they want to see something with more appropriate density that is designed in a way that addresses public safety, environmental concerns that you've heard not only from us, but also from the town and members of the public. We would also like to see a site design that is more respectful of the character of the existing neighborhood. And again, we thank you for the opportunity to participate. We understand that, the board can either approve the project, deny the project, or approve the project with conditions. We don't want to be presumptuous, but if it would be of assistance to the board, we would be happy to submit for the board's consideration some suggested conditions that might be useful for addressing the concerns that our experts have raised.
Great, that's something I was going to raise at the end of the hearing, but I think the board certainly would welcome any types of conditions, proposed decisions, memoranda that anybody, the applicant, and any of the other interested persons here, thought would be helpful to the board and would make your positions clearer, and so we would be thrilled to receive that type of evidence. Thank you very much for your presentation. Let's go back to Dr. Kim, if I can steal Mr. Mullen's statement. We have your alternative cross roadway selection. It's been provided to the applicant. Do you want to briefly review
Sure.
that for us?
First of all, this is not a detailed design, it's a concept, it can be tweaked. I would not consider this an engineered drawing, it's a sketch. All right,
This is about as much as we can understand. The sketch is
Right.
perfect.
so
As-built
there is-
plans would confuse us.
there is one thing that needs to be added to this drawing that's not shown, some kind of a guardrail or a parapet treatment, depending on the height and so on. The boulevard cross-section would include 16-foot travel ways. Basically, that's like a 12-foot lane with 2-foot shoulders. And a mountable median that's 8 feet wide, give or take. Mountable so an emergency vehicle can go over it. And then a space for sidewalk, and then whatever width the retaining walls require. This would be intended as a means of improving emergency access if a second emergency access driveway does not exist. The additional width reduces the likelihood that the driveway will be completely blocked off. Let's say there's a crash on the driveway, stopped vehicles, trees that have come down, whatever. There's more width than just 24 feet. It's a treatment that the town's review consultant mentioned. I've heard it mentioned in other towns as well. Another benefit would be as emergency vehicles are coming in and out, other emergency vehicles could be coming in and out. In fact, other traffic could be coming in and out, regular passenger car-sized vehicles or larger vehicles, trucks, whatever. And this would help reduce conflicts between those various vehicles and maintain in and out flows even during times of emergency. So I'd be happy to answer any questions on that.
Yeah, I have an obvious question, but I don't know the answer to it. If you assume that the travelways, which are 16 feet, are blocked for some reason, maybe people trying to get out of the complex if there were a fire there, would the ordinary reasonably sized fire engine be able to traverse the 8-foot median, or would they need one of the 16-foot medians to gain access?
What would happen is you essentially have about 40 feet of roadway.
Yep.
And because that median's mountable, you have 40 feet to work with.
Okay, so mountable means that there's no guardrails or there's nothing blocking it. So it adds an extra 8 feet to the roadway. So, for example, half the fire truck could be on the 8-foot median and half could be on the 16-foot travelway. Is that what you mean?
Correct.
Okay.
And the mountable median might be defined with a very low curb like you'd have for a truck apron on a roundabout, or it could be some form of a sloped curb that could be mounted, and it gives you 40 feet to work with. So if 10 feet is blocked off, used up, or whatever, there's still 30 feet left.
So that the median would be composed of some type of hard surface. In other words, there wouldn't be plantings there,
Correct.
shrubs or bushes or,
Grass, couldn't it?
It could be, it couldn't be something you couldn't drive over.
right.
But it could be grass.
It could be grass.
Mrs. King, do you have any questions about
No, I
Dr.
don't.
Kim's suggested plan? Mr. Mullen is
So
the
is-
transportation
Is
man,
this
so I'm
looking,
sure he's got some
is
questions.
this looking west?
Whatever
Up the hill?
side,
Up the hill?
it
or
can
down
go
there?
either way, whatever side, the sidewalk could be on whatever side
What would you
fits the site
propose?
best. I haven't thought about which side the sidewalk should be on.
But this is designed to be, it could be either looking up or looking down the hill.
Correct.
And this, the section between, the space between the bottom of the subbase and the undisturbed ground, is that retained fill?
That would, again, I didn't engineer this, but it would be compacted fill. I don't know what,
It's what the, actually, the applicant has it on his last page of the materials, talks about filling that with, clean, durable, granular, fill, compacted, 12-foot lifts to 95% density. So I would assume that it would be the same.
Okay.
right.
So then this would be, just like that, would be in the wetland, and there would be some type of accommodation for the water to go beneath the road. Is that right?
Some type of an open culvert.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. But not a bridge?
It depends on the flows. I mean, that's why the hydraulic analysis is
Yeah.
important, to just figure out how wide does that culvert need to be. It could be a bridge. It's,
At this width, it gets to be a pretty significant structure. I mean, much more significant than a 24-foot, right? You would think.
yes.
Yes.
Did you have a chance to check whether or not they've got 46 feet, or 46 feet plus the precast elements for the entire length? Can they even fit this road within their ownership? Because what happens to this property is, as it gets further to the site, the neighbor's property line moves to the north. It's asymmetrical. And so they have much more property on Randolph Avenue than they do as the road terminates at the top of the hill. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I'm
there's a-
I'm looking
there's
at,
The narrower road fits within the
point.
right-of-way,
Point,
but the
right.
wider road wouldn't. I don't think, not without
It could
intruding.
be- It could be on either side.
Yeah,
It could be
except there's a
moved over.
wetland replication on the other side, on the north side. So you'd really have to fit that into the south.
right, there, again, it's not something
No, I
we
understand. I
engineered,
just-
it's a concept.
No, I just understand, and the concept is that you create enough of a right-of-way so that in the event of a catastrophe or an emergency where the road is blocked, emergency vehicles will be able to access the site, and that would serve as a substitution for the secondary access. That's
Correct.
basically what you're proposing. And but I'm wondering whether the alternative would actually work, given the constraints on the site, because on the north, you've got a wetland, and on the south, you don't own enough right-of-way. I'm just asking that question if I'm thinking about it correctly.
Could I ask you a question rather than the witness?
I'm not testifying.
I understand you're
Member of the
you're not
board.
under oath, but are you assuming, Mr. Mullen, that when you say the driveway is inadequate, it's because there are residences?
Well, they own
along-
this property here.
Yes, and I thought they owned most of the properties
It's up
along
here,
the frontage.
it's up here.
Okay,
That's
Yep.
what happens.
okay. When you get to the upper side
Yeah,
of the
up to the
the
top of the
road,
hill, it's narrower.
and so they run out of land.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think they do.
Do you see that, Kim? Do you understand
I
that?
see the corner that juts out.
Yeah, that's what
and I-
Mr. Mullen is saying. It's-
And I see the wetlands off to the north side, but those wetlands are owned by the applicant, correct?
Right.
Yes.
That
And it-
replication area, yeah,
And I'm
That's a
thinking-
replication area.
right.
And again, I might be speaking a little out of my expertise, and it might be in the form of a question of my own team. Other work they'd be doing to provide this wider cross-section would also affect the wetlands, not just in that corner. Am I right on that?
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
once you widen it, you're impacting a lot more
Yeah.
than just the replicated wetland area.
Yeah, okay. Okay. That's all.
Okay. I don't have any further questions, so Ms. Schreiber, thank you for your presentation, and thank you, witnesses. Are they going to stick around for the rest of the
If the board would
hearing?
like him to, absolutely.
Well, particularly Dr. Kim would like to have him stick around. Mr. Casciano, are you prepared to go forward with your traffic engineering testimony at the present time?
Well, yeah, if it's okay with you, Mr. Chairman, we'd like Jim Burke to address the board, address some of the comments from Ms. Bernardo, and as well address some of the traffic comments as well.
Well, that's terrific, because I didn't know whether he'd have an opportunity to do that. So you want Mr. Burke to testify first?
Yes, please.
Okay. You want to come up here and have a seat, Alan, and make yourself comfortable? Mr. Burke, take your time and get set up. Mr. Burke, why don't you identify yourself and let me welcome you back to the Board of Appeals.
Certainly, thank you very much. Jim Burke, registered professional engineer with Tassell Burke and Associates. And I guess, you know, I'm not really too sure where to start. There's so many different revisions that we've made recently that the board's going to receive very soon that answer a lot of those questions.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
What do you mean by very soon?
Well, I was thinking at the end of this week, but I hear Mary is not going to be back till Monday, so I'm not too sure if, you know, when the good time to submit is.
Monday would be the first opportunity that the board could sit at a public hearing.
Right.
You certainly could file before then, and the board could review the materials. And,
Sure.
I think what Jim's saying is Mary's not available tomorrow and Friday to receive the materials.
well, we'll have somebody at Town Hall
Okay.
who can do that. We'll get you a contact person.
Okay, so it'll either be tomorrow or Friday.
Okay, is that a comfortable schedule for you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So I guess
And
that being
sure,
said,
I'm sorry, Mr. Mullen wants to ask you a question.
Sure.
But let me just say, included in your submission, whatever it may be, does it include copies of the plans that you're going to be showing on the fiber boards this evening?
on this particular plan, yes, that'll be included. I've done some blow-ups of certain areas where we made some revisions. The recreation area, the revised parking layout to get the retaining wall outside the 25-foot buffer. We've also regraded the roadway for a 2% leveling area at the entrance, so the grading's been revised. The hydrology, the hydraulics have been changed to the request of niche engineering to change the soils from a C to a B soil, which increased all the sizes of the detention basins.
Okay, well, I think I'm going to get
yeah.
you ahead of where you want to be, so I apologize
That's okay.
for leading you astray there. Mr. Mullen, do you have your question? Okay, so why don't you make your presentation? We're delighted to hear from you.
And I guess I was going to start there anyway and just kind of run through a real quick iteration with regards to, you know, what changes we've made and that we're listening to the board and we're listening to the abutters. Let's just say. As far as maybe what we can start with is kind of the revised parking layout. We used to have this over in this location here. This is this dark line represents the 25-foot no disturb buffer. We eliminated 2 spaces in this location.
Now, don't burst into song.
Wrong side of the family.
Go ahead, thank you.
Yeah. But, so we pulled this in, and we, in addition to that, we eliminated 2 spaces here to create a fire lane for a turnaround. So now we're 4 spaces short. We created them over here. So we have still a net, we haven't lost any spaces with this revision. another revision.
So you have the same number of spaces, they're just placed differently on the
Correct.
project? Okay.
Exactly right. There was concerns with regards to what we were going to do with the recreation area and the grading. It might be like a minor issue related to the project, but we wanted to kind of correct that. And basically, this is the same roadway that was proposed earlier. It was squared up. Now we just changed it into a circle. The grades in this area are probably like at about 4%, a lot more manageable. And we're just showing some picnic tables and some horseshoe pits because I like horseshoes. And we're not too sure exactly how that's going to play out, but it's definitely going to be something similar to that, a passive recreation kind of a situation.
And what were the change grades in that particular site? If they're 4% now, were they higher?
We're looking to just maintain existing grades.
Okay, all right, so the grade is the same.
When it was up here, it was a lot steeper. It was probably like, 10%.
Well, that's what I intended to ask. My
Yeah.
question wasn't very good.
So,
So
yeah.
you went to an area, so the grade comes from 10% to 4%.
Correct.
Okay, great.
What else do I got? This was probably part of the toughest part, and it's hard to see in this particular scenario. I used to have this roadway coming down, dipping down at 5%, and then coming back up at 6. Through the traffic reports and other reviews, they were looking for a 2% leveling area. And more than likely, Mass DOT was going to require that in their permitting as well. So we moved forward in revising the grading in the front end. And all that really did is, created a little more additional fill. It actually flattened this out to 5.2%. So the gradient leading into the property now is less steep than what was originally proposed.
What's the horizontal distance on the 2%?
50 feet.
2 car lengths?
It's probably more like 3.
I think Dirk would say 2, but,
Yeah.
okay.
But it's exactly what they were looking to provide. Well, what they were looking to provide. We've also have a lighting plan, and this is going to be part of the package. Those dots that you see in that background there, that is actually foot candles, the intensity of the light. And the design called for 0 foot candles at the property line. In a lot of instances, it's 0 before that. And it also is dark sky compliant as requested by Niche Engineering. So that also is going to be in the package.
Is the applicant still seeking a waiver from the section of the bylaws pertaining to lighting?
I would have to say yes at this point. I don't believe that we're going to need it, but I think at this point, until we get some feedback from the board, we'd probably request to have that remain.
Well, if you don't need it, why are you asking for it?
Because honestly, off the top of my head, I can't remember what the requirements are. But
The application seeks a waiver from the section of the bylaw pertaining to lighting in its entirety. If you've got a lighting plan, my question is, does it comply with the bylaw?
I guess without knowing the bylaw off the top of my head, I couldn't answer that directly.
Okay.
This lighting plan is new, so we'll have to compare it against the bylaw. We'll do that.
My expectation is yes.
Just as a general point, Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
What
sir.
would be helpful is, with respect, and this is why I groaned when you said you were going to be submitting drawings, because we spent time looking at the old ones. I get it, it's changed. But it'd be also helpful to see how the application has changed to respond to the drawings. Because what I'm focused on are the waivers that are being sought. If that has changed because the drawings have changed, it would be helpful for the board to know. That's all. Thank you.
In addition to the submission, there was a lot of concern with regards to traffic movements on the site. There's going to be sketches provided in the package that show emergency vehicles, a 43-foot-long fire ladder truck, which is pictured here, along with refuse vehicles and a school bus. And this particular scenario shows how this turnaround, which is going to be painted as a fire lane, will be able to allow this vehicle to back up in this location and pull out that way. It's as opposed to the concern that was that the original design called for a significantly longer backup maneuver. So I think that that helped us out a bit. This is my favorite. This is not going to be submitted part of the package, but this is, let's see if I put this back. A lot has been talked about the 24-foot wide driveway. And Ms. Bernardo used the AASHTO guidelines policy, the Green Book, I assume, dated 2011. Really for public roadways. There really wasn't a design guideline for driveways. So what we've found was the NCHRP, which is more a little bit applicable for driveways, Guide for Geometrical Design of Driveways, by the National Cooperative Highway Research Program, report number 659. What that basically says is that 24-foot is actually large. It's a large average. And that's being part of the submission letter for Horsley Witten response. In addition,
And that's for a 90-unit development such as this?
It says
with
a
a
residential driveway that for,
residential driveway? No, I mean, how closely does that tie into a project very similar in size to this, entering and egressing onto a major road with the traffic patterns that Dr. Delasky has told us about here?
it ties in exactly well. I mean, that's what the report was designed to provide, is
For
information.
multifamily,
Exactly right.
and is it your suggestion? A particular organization is one that's well-respected and it's
I would ask Dr. Delasky to speak on that because he's the one who provided me the information. But my guess is yes.
Okay, well, we'll ask Dr. Delasky some penetrating questions about whether local traffic engineers usually and customarily rely on this
Sure.
particular organization and where they are and what types of developments this refers to. So why don't you just go on, Mr.
Sure.
Burke?
The other one is the Milton zoning bylaw, section 7F, number 5, width and construction of driveways, calls for a 24-foot maximum for driveways for leading to parking lots. And we certainly don't want...
That's irrespective of the use?
Excuse me?
The 24 feet maximum is irrespective of the use to which the driveway is being put?
The use, as it applies in the bylaw, it talks about parking lots.
15 cars or more, is that correct?
Right.
Okay.
And it's limited to, it says the limit is a maximum of 24.
So as you can guess, it's still our contention that the 24-foot drive is more than adequate to provide service to this development. I guess we can move on to the drainage and answer some questions with regards to, answer some concerns from Ms. Bernardo. The detention structures underneath the buildings, and she's correct. I've done several of them under buildings in the city of Boston. I've done so many out in the suburbs, but I've done one in Quincy. I think I got one in Weymouth. But, you know, as far as the setbacks go, it's really kind of a concern with regards to setbacks to living space. It's kind of the same thing you'd have with a septic system, where a septic system has to be 20 feet off of a foundation wall. And that's just for, you know, to prevent any sort of seepage of going into any sort of living space. What you have here is a garage slab on grade. Groundwater's going to be going, you know, vertically and somewhat horizontally, recharging into the ground. So to me, it's the setback issues related to that are unrelated to what the regulations really call for. The underground detention structures too only have a roof runoff related to it. So there's no real sediment going into it. Long-term maintenance for this certainly can be accomplished with manholes at the inlets and at the outlets, maybe one midway through, and we've provided that on the drawings too, as requested by niche engineering. So to me, you know, it's, as a design engineer, you know, if they're constructed properly and they're maintained as required by, you know, the bylaws that are available, they should last for a very long time. The ones that are outside are constructed the exact same way. They have water quality tanks in front of them that will reduce the suspended solids. It's the sediment that that can really cause the failure, and really nothing else. And the same situations will exist for those structures for maintenance in the future.
Yeah, but do those sediments in any way, if the system fails, could they affect the structural integrity of the building?
No, you know, honestly,
That's probably why you want to keep it outside the building.
no, you know, honestly, groundwater and soil and foundations have been living together for thousands of years. Structural engineer will design accordingly for groundwater to move through it. So no, as far as the undermining.
How about when you throw in the grades of the land surrounding these buildings? Does that create any particular problems regarding stormwater and the integrity of the pilings or foundations of the building?
No, I mean, because what you have when you create your foundation, you have your crushed stone bed. But you certainly can be in groundwater when you're establishing that. The groundwater will ebb and flood into these structures as well. And you know, washing out sediment isn't something that readily occurs. Now, if you have a water main break, say you have a certain amount of pressure that's generating a hole, it's certainly going to change the situation, but that's not groundwater. And we're talking about the laminar flow of water through a soil. And part and parcel to the drainage, both niche engineering and Hosley Witten asked for the additional information with regards to the sizing of the culvert, that it's a 12-foot wide culvert. There's a singular one, and the concern was the backup of the stormwater as it flows through that culvert. I analyzed it, and it's going to be part of the package. There's a 5-inch increase in floodwaters behind the wetlands. The wetlands right now flow at about elevation 108.3 for a 100-year storm. Now, that elevation is maintained on the down gradient side of the wetland, and it is, I want to say, 108.9 on the up gradient side for a 100-year storm event. So to me, that culvert is, and it was sized, it wasn't sized hydraulically, it was actually sized to accommodate for critter traffic. We designed the system to actually, with the concern of the stream crossing guidelines. We have an open bottom box culvert. We are going to use natural substrate, the soils that we'll be stockpiling, and we'll be using that for the backfill underneath the culvert. So a lot of the constraints that were applied to the stream crossing guidelines, even though we're not applicable to them, we're continuing to construct the culvert in that manner. A lot of the detail that both niche engineering and Hosley Witten have asked for, you'll find them in the plans, like a signage plan, curbing detail, like I say, the big item that's really changed is what Scott Turner asked for is, changing from C soils to B soils. The 2-year storm for existing conditions went from, I want to say 5 CFS to 1 CFS. And all of a sudden, the controls, that changed the controls. So it took me a while to wrestle that to the ground. But we meet all the stormwater management guidelines with regards to peak flow and suspended solids removal and the like. So it's our contention that the stormwater management system is designed in accordance with current regulations and is more than adequate to serve this development for several years.
We hope a few more years than that, but why don't...
How many is
well,
several?
I'm just playing games with you. We understand what you mean. Do you have anything else you'd like to add?
No, I'm here to answer any questions you have.
Great. Let me ask Mr. Mullen if he has any questions.
Is this our chance to ask all the questions? What is this?
Well, you can ask any
I know
question
that.
you want. The difficulty is we don't have Mr. Burke's submittals to review. Are you going to be present at the next hearing
Yes.
of the board?
Mhm.
So if the board wanted to ask you further questions, you'd be available at that time?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's great. So you
So
want
are
to
we-
defer, or you want to ask questions now?
Well, I'm just make sure I understand.
Sure.
So are we going to get your reference to the NCHRP in the new submittal? Is that coming to us? Or
Yes.
should we make note of that?
I can make it available to you, certainly.
And the current cross-section that you have laid out, the 24-foot, how does that lay out? Just remind me of
Sure, you have, on either side, you have probably about, I want to say 3 foot 4 inch, might be 3 foot 6 inch retaining walls on either side. And if you're looking up gradient, if you're looking from Randolph Ave to your back, oh, thank you. You're going to have basically top of the wall with a guardrail. Then you're going to have 6-inch curb, 24 feet of pavement, 6-inch curb, 4-foot sidewalk, guardrail, and back down to the wall. And that all fits in, I want to say 43 feet. I can't read that. But, from limited work, and I heard what you had, your concern with the constructability. I had the advantage of being on, when they built that, it is a little bit different, but the corridor was a lot more smaller, the foul metal pressure main, and I was working for the town at the time. And, those guys went down a 12-foot corridor and put in, 4-foot diameter pipe, and the methodology would be similar. With a truck backing up, you'd have your excavator in front, he'd, turn and throw the soil into the 10-wheeler, and another wheeler would come in, you'd fill, and you'd kind of inch your way out vertically, then you'd place your stone and just keep going out and going up. That's why I chose the product. Doesn't need a lot of width to work with. You place the stone with the excavator, place the stone strong product with the excavator, and you stay within the hay bales. And honestly, a condition that we talked about with Alan and Paul Holland, the applicant, was an environmental monitor. And, I've done other wetlands crossings with environmental monitors before. I'm confident, more than confident, that we can build this within the corridor that we provided.
So when you're making these, thank you, when you're making, another question?
Sure.
When you're making these modifications and thinking about the design, have you had a chance to think about how compliant the application is with the Commonwealth Sustainable Development Principles?
I have not.
I think it'd be helpful to understand that in light of some of the testimony that we've heard over the last few hearings. That's a requirement of the application,
Sure, that
as
was
I understand the letter from MHFA.
Yeah, that was addressed in the project eligibility application.
I know it was, but there's been significant, you know, the application also indicated that this was a transit-friendly development, and I think we've established that it's really not a transit-friendly development, and there's been some changes to the project. There's been a significant amount of testimony about the implication and the impacts to wetlands in the town of Milton. And I think it would be helpful to have a better understanding of how it addresses the Commonwealth Sustainable Development Principles. I want to understand the turnaround. When the fire chief was here, he indicated that he would have a number of calls to the site each week, and that each time they were on the site, traffic would be limited or restricted. But I also thought that he said that the trucks were going to be backing down the hill. Are your modifications designed to avoid that?
Yes, but the original design called for the backup of, if it was way on the northerly parking lot, it would have to back up through and do that zigzag through the central parking lot, and then turn to the left and then pull forward. It was never the intent of the design to have it back up all the way down.
Well, I know, but I think the chief said he was going to back those trucks down the hill. At least that was what my
Yeah.
note
No,
indicated.
that's exactly what he said.
That's what he
Yeah.
said.
And again, you know, I think that would be unreasonable personally. And I think, you know, backing up through a couple of parking lots also with a 43-foot-long ladder truck is fairly unreasonable as well. And we looked hard and long with regards to how to revise the design without the expense of losing parking spaces, and we were lucky enough to get that.
Could I ask you one question on that? And I'm not a traffic engineer. This is a mystery to me. I see what you tried to do on the plan. You've moved the backup location further, closer to the end of the road, so a vehicle could, yes.
Yeah.
So rather than turning way at the left-hand side of the project, you're turning
Right.
up in there.
So if you know, and imagine, and the fire chief also talked about setting up and where he places vehicles, and I'm not too sure how he would do it, and it's certainly an interesting item, but, you know, he might put one here, he might put one here. If he puts one here, this guy can just kind of back up here and go. If he puts one up here, he can kind of do the same thing. If this guy's here, maybe he can pull forward and back up and go.
Yeah, but my question was going to be, if there was an emergency, we know when people come, the fire trucks, the police, the ambulances, they get there as fast as possible, so you don't know who's going to be accessing the site at any given point in time. It's just, it may be fortuitous, may depend on the traffic on Randolph Avenue, who knows? But so when all of these rescue and fire and support vehicles come piling onto this road, and aren't they going to make your revised backup area basically impossible to access? Because they're all going to be backed up in line on that road, and the only way that some of the vehicles that are the first responders, so to speak, could utilize that backup area is if the other vehicles backed up 200 or 300 feet. And so isn't that really I don't want to say a false remedy, because I know you're using your best judgment to try to resolve an issue, but is that really a practical alternative under the circumstances of an emergency, as opposed to the fire truck just coming in there for a limited purpose?
Yeah, I think it is a valuable, elimination of a couple of spaces. If you wait 2 spaces with regards to a turnaround, I mean, not only can the fire trucks and emergency vehicles use that turnaround, people looking for parking spaces can use that turnaround. So to me, it is a,
Do you think it's a substantial change and a substantial benefit to prevent having to back down that long curved driveway? Or in the event of a real emergency, whether it's a heart attack or the buildings are on fire, that perhaps looks better than it is in reality.
No, yeah, no, I think it's viable, yes.
Okay.
I'd just like to reiterate also that when the fire chief had testified, he had indicated that although not ideal, he was comfortable with the access and his ability to move around the site, even without knowing that the original turnaround was there. So we had, in addition to the original turnaround, we've added this second turnaround to increase their ability.
No, I'm not being critical, I'm just trying to get an assessment as a layman whether that is a substantial benefit to this plan, or is it something that is helpful if there's one vehicle there or maybe two vehicles there, but in the event of an emergency, that's somewhat of a false premise. But that's my
I think
question.
honestly, in a real emergency, if you're looking at a fire, that I'm sure it's, some sort of organized dance that they're gonna be doing. And I think that particular, option of being able to turn around in that location would be helpful.
Dealing with Dr. Hasavarian's plan, the alternative roadway cross-section, did you take a look at that?
I did.
Okay.
Mr. Leonard, may I just ask a question before you move on? to
Of
that?
course you can.
The fire chief also testified that he would anticipate that there would be several calls per week to this site. It was either per day or per week, I forget it, which was
Well,
two, right?
yes.
Which was dramatically higher than comparable numbers that we receive from abutting towns. How would we obtain clarification from the fire chief as to, what, if several times per day or week is what he actually intended to say?
Well, the only thing I can tell you is you could certainly call the fire chief, you could talk with Ms. O'Donnell. I think the best evidence of what the fire chief said is probably in the public record. We have the tape recording of his testimony. You certainly could listen to that. I'm really unfamiliar with the nuances of public access TV. I don't know whether you can access the the actual video recording of his testimony
Well, I've-
remotely, and if you can, it's right there. And
So, yeah, we've heard the testimony. Whether it's per day or per week, it's still significantly higher than comparables that we've received.
Well,
from
then you should
towns.
put in evidence of your comparables and put in your own case and let the, if Ms. O'Donnell wants to have the fire chief back here or have him submit an affidavit or a letter, that's fine. I mean, as of now, we don't have the evidence that you're talking about. Presumably, you're going to submit it. And then when you do, Ms. O'Donnell has the opportunity of conferring with the fire chief and either rebutting it or
Yeah, I
not.
believe it was submitted in one of our prior submissions. But
I don't have
understood.
any recollection of that.
I don't think the real issue is the number of times that the fire chief has to send equipment into the site. But even if it's once a month, the issue is how are they gonna get in and how are they gonna get out? So how many times people are inconvenienced because of that is not really, I don't think, a particularly germane issue. I mean, when he's in there with 4 pieces of equipment, nobody, as the chief has said, is gonna get in or out. So whether that happens once a month, once a week, it's still, that's the issue that he's dealing with. That was, he was describing. I don't think the number of times that happens is as much of an issue as the fact that it's going to happen.
Okay.
So people are gonna have to, understand that when the fire equipment's there, they're gonna be stuck.
Sure.
So you just may want to direct the board's attention to that evidence if it's already been submitted so we can take a look at it.
Sure.
I want to ask you, Mr. Burke, a layman's question about the alternative roadway plan.
Sure.
Because this plan has 2 16-foot travelways, and there's an 8-foot mountable median in the middle of it. And my question is, and it's a layman's question, it's not a technical question, doesn't that plan provide for much more safe and convenient access than your plan? Because you've got a 24-foot roadway, presumably if there's an accident or something happens, that could be blocked off, whereas under the Mr. Havatarian's plan, I know I'm pronouncing his name, so please, I apologize for that in advance, Dr. Kim's plan, you have the benefit of having both travelways, but also supplemented by the mountable median strip. So doesn't that give you more safe and flexible development into the property, although it brings with it a lot of additional environmental checks and permits and concerns and maybe
Impacts,
costs
right.
and impacts.
Sure.
So,
You know, I think, you know, the mountable berm is something that we can aspire to as well. I mean, if you had to, you certainly could mount the sidewalk that we have to get by. I mean, the two 16-foot lanes and the 8-foot wide medium, I think is, you know, honestly, incredibly wide. I could see, you know, half of about all of them, but.
well, if you had to make a decision when you're dealing with not only convenient access, but while I love convenience, I'm more concerned with public safety,
Sure.
with safe access to this site under emergency conditions. Wouldn't you generally err on the side of a wider and more flexible roadway than the roadway that the applicant has
Sure,
suggested?
we're constrained with regards to the site, what the site is available to give to us. You know, and the thing is, if we came in with a similar proposal with the Conservation Commission, my guess is they'd ask us to reduce the width because of the wetlands impacts. I mean, the alternatives would be that. The alternatives would be how less can you go?
Well,
And so, I mean, the thing is right now, is that we're saying we comply with the regulations that allow us to proceed with the safe access.
right, but Attorney Schneider would tell you, well, the problem is you're creating your own problems by the size of the project, and that if you scale the project down, maybe you wouldn't need a plan or an alternative roadway, as Dr. Kim is suggesting.
But
It's kind of the yin and the yang, isn't
yeah,
it?
you know, and the driveway width, the 12-foot lanes, you know, for the 670 trips that are available, and with if you applied the ASHTO methods, they want 5-foot shoulders on either side. And the shoulder's really kind of for more or less, you know, automobiles to maybe, you know, stop and, you know, break down and that kind of thing. What we're talking about isn't a public way. What we're talking about is a driveway, a short driveway that's about 300 feet long that accesses.
With dramatic slopes that you'd prefer not to be there. If you had in the ideal world, you'd prefer not to be
Yeah,
going
well, you know,
up
like
the
I
side
said,
of a hill.
5.2% is not a dramatic slope. You'll find that, you know, that's a very manageable slope to navigate. 6% isn't bad either. 2% is what is required for, which is the leveling area coming in, is what's required for handicap accessibility for a ramp. So, I mean, the town of Milton required, the maximum grade is 8%. You can go take a look at, what's that, it's right across the street from Matrakas. You know, that road there is 8%. And, you know, from a standpoint of, is it easily navigable? It certainly is.
But it's a shorter road, it's much shorter road.
No, actually it's actually, I think it's probably longer than what the driveway is proposed to be. I think that's 500 feet.
Then I must be thinking of a different project.
Yeah, no, it's, Charlie Bosworth built it.
Yes,
But anyway.
I thought it was rather a short entrance in with houses around it. Is it six
No,
or eight
yeah,
houses?
that's a different one. That is a
Okay,
different one.
then I'm thinking of something different. Mrs. King, do you have any questions of Mr. Burke? Okay. If you have nothing else, Mr.
I
Casciano?
would just also like to point out that, again, the fire chief, when he gave his testimony, did not raise concern with his ability to access the site or the width of the drive as well. And I'd also like to just point out that there are other developments within Milton that have similar access drives. similar width access drives.
Let's
That-
talk
that-
about
that-
those.
that
What
goes-
are those?
Yeah, where are they, and do they stub off like this one does with,
Is there anything
with no,
similar to
with no
Milton in this?
looping?
Winter Valley.
Why don't you tell us your name, Mr.
Paul-
Holland? So
Paul
we'll-
Holland.
Good, welcome back to the Board of Appeals, Mr.
Thank you.
Holland.
Unquity House has a 20-foot driveway.
I'm sorry, could you hold 1 second,
Sorry.
please? As usually happens here. My ink supply has left me. And I don't want to miss what you have to say. Go ahead, why don't you go?
Unquity House has a single access, it's only 20 feet wide.
How many units is at Equity House?
It's
you
like
know?
200, I think, does that sound right? Two.
I would question the fact that it only has one access. It actually isn't, it's different. Unquity House and Winter Valley are both different from this project. Neither one of them require a bridge and a culvert to go over
Well,
wetlands.
and
And they also border other streets, so.
Okay. Why don't you tell us about the roadways at
Sure.
Equity House?
I mean, I didn't get a chance to finish.
That's all right.
Winter Valley has, the incline going in there is much steeper than our incline. I don't exactly know what it would be. It's off of Canton Ave.
Winter Valley,
With
yeah.
the same exact 24-foot wide roadway with a 5-foot wide sidewalk.
Does the roadway loop in that project, or does it come
There's-
to a stub like here?
There is a second means of egress, but it's across a shared driveway with a private property, so it was like barricaded the day I was kind of taking a look at.
How about Equity House? Does it have an emergency secondary access?
It doesn't.
It doesn't.
It doesn't. Even like newer complexes like Lower Fuller Village, 1372, that has multiple access points, but none of those access points is wider than 22 feet.
Anything else you'd like to
So
add?
those were the three
Okay,
comparable.
Mr. Mullen has a question.
I think a lot of the questions around the size and the width of the access road have as much to do with the character of Randolph Avenue as anything else. So I would just be mindful of that, and when we have this conversation. The question I have for the applicant, I know we've talked a lot about the fire chief. The police chief came and had a lot of conversation about the crash rates on 28, the traffic conditions on 28, the backing up of the queue from Reedsdale Road, and particularly in the PM. I'm wondering if there's any conversation about that, including the recent fatality on Randolph Avenue that the applicant wants to speak to, and the overall general safety, or the thought of the condition of Randolph Avenue vis-à-vis the application, in light of what the police chief testified to.
Traffic entrance, right?
Good evening.
Why don't you tell us your name, sir?
Daniel Delaski, registered professional engineer in the state of Massachusetts, consultant to DeSalle Burke on this project.
Good. Welcome back to the Board of Appeals, Doctor.
Good evening. So, Mr. Mullen, to address your concern in terms of crashes and crash rates along,
No, I wasn't expressing an individual concern. I was expressing your reaction to what the police chief testified to, about his concern.
okay, so in order of what you shared with me, or just a few minutes ago, in terms of the queue backing up along that section, based on the data that we collected, so over 48 hours, we went out and we put tubes in the roadway. This was
February
back in-
25th, 2014.
Excellent.
Which was not,
Was
a
it-
s- which was not a
Uh,
snow
It's
emergency,
just, that was the
correct?
day, it was February 25th,
You've got it.
2014.
So 2 days there, we did 48-hour counts.
48-hour continuous
You've got it.
period, Tuesday and Wednesday.
So we got volumes, we got speeds, and I looked at the counts during the peak hours, both AM and PM, in terms of prevailing speeds. And from the data that were collected, there was nothing that indicated a significant queue right in front of the applicant's driveway, so 711 Randolph Avenue. So basically what I looked at is I looked at the speeds during the peak hours, and there was, I mean, the 85th percentile was still up in the 40-mile-an-hour range. So what happens, or what you would have expected, is if there were significant queues, the speeds during those times would have been significantly reduced, and they weren't. So I realize it's 2 days, they're sample points, and I'm sure the chief has examples of his experiences as well. But from what we have in terms of data that were collected, it's in the back of the traffic report. It shows that, speeds during the peak hours were where they are in terms of 85th percentile.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
What about the crash rates, the recent fatality?
So when you look at the
Concerns.
So when you look at the crash rates, and Jeffrey Dirk from VAI reviewed the report, when you look at the immediate intersections, the crash rates are below the district average. When you look at the fatalities that happened, and I don't have the exact reasons for the fatalities in front of me, but I know that the police chief sent them to me. I reviewed the crash reports, and what you will find, at least the three that I looked at, were south of the site, and actually there were 4 there, I believe, and 3 of them were a result of driver error. So when you look at crashes, 90% of the crashes occur in this world because of driver error. The fatalities, I want to say somebody hit a curb, somebody hit a traffic controller or a traffic signal post south of the site, and I can't remember what the last one was. But what I was looking for were patterns where people may be crossing lanes of traffic, similar to entering and exiting the site, to see if this site may be compromised in terms of safety, and looking at the crash rates at those intersections, and more specifically looking at the fatals that the chief provided the reports for, there was nothing that showed driving conditions that are similar to the site that would lead to, the fatals that you're referring to. If that makes sense.
I don't know.
Don't add that to your testimony.
Did you have a chance to think about the school bus issue that's been raised here, and how that school bus is going to work?
I have, and if you go back to my testimony from last December, we sat and we had a long conversation about Randolph Ave. And we talked about lane widths, we talked about speeds out there, we talked about volumes.
11 feet, you said.
It's a 46-foot cross-section, so we're in the 11-foot ballpark, you're absolutely right. And when I think about school buses, when I think about what Milton wants that roadway to look like, there's potential to reduce that cross-section by a lane in the southbound direction, based on the traffic volumes that are out there today.
So
Crossing-
asymmetrical.
What crossing? I mean, what road? Randolph by Elaine?
Randolph Avenue,
Just wanted to make sure we were talking about what road you were talking about.
I'm talking about
So
Randolph
you
Avenue.
have asymmetrical.
You'd have an asymmetrical cross-section, that's right. And what does that do? That gives you an opportunity to provide whatever the town would like to see out there, whether it's additional amenities for cycling, walking, wider sidewalks along Randolph Avenue.
Would that work, do you think, based on the traffic counts?
It would in the middle. So when you get to this intersections, when you get to the signalized intersections, you'd have to flare out, obviously, for the left turns and the right turns. But in the middle of that corridor, you could reduce the cross-section based on the existing volume.
Southbound.
Southbound. Yeah, northbound, the traffic's too high. Southbound, the number's just in the ballpark of 1,300 southbound.
You've met with MassDOT, right?
We met with MassDOT about 3 to 4 weeks ago for preliminary
Just that one
conversation.
meeting?
That's correct.
Yeah.
And we're trying to get through the plans that Mr. Burke will be submitting tomorrow, and then trying to get the application together for a sit-down with MassDOT.
When you suggest that might work, the loss of a lane, is that aspirational, or do you actually think that that's something that could be proposed and implemented?
You look at the town of Braintree, down in front of Chili's and the recycling center, they took an entire center lane and basically striped it. So I don't look at it as aspirational. I look at it as, okay, what do we want this roadway to be out there? Do we want it to continue to be this thoroughfare, or do we want it to be more of a street where people can walk and enjoy, and we don't put people on bikes out in the street, we put them on wide cycle tracks or sidewalks above. So it's a question of, what's the function of this roadway?
Yeah. There's been some concern, and my own concern, about traffic exiting, especially in the morning or entering in the evening, exiting in the morning and heading to town, and entering from the evening from the south into the site, basically taking those lefts. Especially the exit, crossing 2 live lanes and maybe even a 3rd lane to get over to the right, and then heading up Pleasant Street or to the light at the church. Have you given thought to limiting the exit to a right only out, and whether or not that would work, in your opinion?
So we have, and then just to kind of back up and then go forward, when you think about what's in front of this site, so you've got a 4-lane cross-section, you've got 85th percentile speeds of 45 miles an hour. I've spent a lot of time over the last 6 weeks to 2 months thinking about what is like this in the state. Come down to Route 1 in Foxborough. What do we have? We have 4-lane roadways, Route 1. We have 55, 60 mile an hour speeds, and we have Dunkin' Donuts. We have all sorts of different uses along the roadway that are similar in terms of traffic volume and crossing lanes of traffic to get out. So globally, it happens. Locally, when we think about what you're talking about at Meg Lane, I've thought long and hard about it. We've performed a gap study out there. And looking at the gap study, during the AM peak, the projected volume is less than the number of available gaps out in Randolph Ave northbound. So if somebody's leaving the site and they want to go northbound, there may not be enough gaps northbound for the left-turning traffic to accept. So our suggestion is, in terms of what you're saying, we would strongly urge and encourage people with a sign when they're leaving the site to take a right out of the driveway and head south to either Hillside or Chickatobit, and then go up Unquity to Blue Hills Parkway. That would be our recommendation. Realizing and hearing from the neighbors and the abutters on Clifton and the like that they don't need additional traffic. I know the applicant is in favor of, if needed, putting signs down there, do not enter during peak hours or the like, through that neighborhood. So the thought is, we would encourage and promote people to take a right during peak hours out of the front door and go down to Hillside or Chickatobit.
Is that, I'm sorry, Mr.
No,
Chairman.
no, I was just going to say, why wouldn't you require that rather than just recommend it?
We could require it, but the idea would be to
For public
require-
safety
Sure, we
purposes.
could require it through signs, right? There's two options here. We could put signs up that would certainly prohibit it during certain hours.
Yes.
Or we could do a right island out, which basically forces everybody to do that throughout the day. And during non-peak hours, there would be available gaps for people to take a left.
And what about the left end?
So the left in, let's see, left from the major during the AM peak, we've got approximately, I believe it was 3 people coming into the site, and there were adequate gaps there. And in the PM, we had 13 people coming in. This is northbound left into the site, and there were adequate gaps there as well. So the real concern, or I shouldn't say
There's
concern.
a lot of southbound traffic in the PM.
There is, but there were still, we performed a gap study, and there's still adequate gaps. The difference, yeah, right, okay.
Let me ask you, though, is this this is news to me, and I think what is news to the neighbors, you know, and is this something that will be expressed in the modified plans, and is this something that we should assume is now the recommended traffic pattern for the exiting of the, particularly exiting the site?
So when we look at this, and, you know, it's a conversation that we want to have with you as well as Mass DOT, not only do we think and are considering using the right turn out, but one idea that we also had, and again, you know, when you talk about aspirational, perhaps, but certainly practical, is to put a detector. Put a detector on Meg Lane to extend the reds at the adjacent intersections, the bookended intersections, to create, extend it by 2 to 3, 4 seconds to create additional gaps for the exiting traffic off of Meg Lane.
Meg Lane is
The proponent's site, the applicant's site.
yeah, not really Meg Lane.
Right, right.
Fake Meg Lane.
Fake Meg Lane.
Private Meg Lane. Driveway Meg Lane.
Driveway Meg Lane,
Yeah.
that's right.
Let's
The
not
old-
call it
the-
Meg Lane.
The old
That's-
subdivision.
Makes me confused.
So the thought is detector, extend,
Yeah.
right.
So you just, so we, I don't know how to react to this, but let me just put out there that if you do take a right and you're forced to take a right on Hillside or Chickatobit, I'm not sure you're ever gonna get to work. But, unless you work in Stoughton.
Right.
Which is perfectly fine, but I think a lot of people are gonna be headed to town, or Ashmont Station, or wherever it is they need to go. And I think that, I think it would help maybe we suspend this line of questioning because this is a new fact and maybe give other people an opportunity to speak and maybe we can think a little bit more about it. I appreciate the engaging of the issue, but that this is a different, it's a new development. Let me ask one more question. This could take a while. On the Route 1 Foxborough example, what's the width of that cross-section?
It's probably either equal or a bit wider, because the shoulders and the
They've got
lane.
some shoulders going on there, right?
They're not, in certain areas, they're not full shoulders, but you're still, so that the point there is you're crossing even more pavement to accelerate to get into the opposite lane.
Yeah, no, I think of that road as much more complicated than the simple 4-lane cross-section that we're really dealing with. I mean, one of the issues we have with Randolph Avenue is its simplicity, which encourages speed. It makes it a very difficult road, I think, and a very unsafe road from the town's perspective. And there's not a whole lot of maneuvering room, but I don't think of that way of Route 1 in Foxborough. Maybe there's a particular area of Route 1 Foxborough that you're thinking about that might help us.
Well, I'm thinking of the area south of Lowe's, heading down
South of
towards,
Lowe's.
towards North Attleboro, where, when you talk about complications, you're talking about land uses that you've got curb cuts that are extended length curb cuts, and lots of them.
Yeah.
The density is pretty high.
Okay. Okay. No further questions for now.
Mrs. King, do you have any questions? I have a question for you, Mr. Delaski, and that is I appreciate your testimony regarding the gap study and the conclusions that you have drawn from it in the very limited circumstances that you've referred to here. At some point in time, are you going to offer this gap study into evidence? Is it going to be available for Dr. Kim and Mr. Lombardi to read, or anyone else who's present to read and analyze it?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Of course.
Absolutely. We will we'll provide the gap study that was provided to us by an outside firm that collected the data for us.
Okay, and is the gap study just a plan with a lot of right and left-hand arrows with the numbers, or is it something that layperson could, does it have some text so that a layperson could read the gap study and understand what it says?
There's very limited text, but there are numbers and gaps that make sense. So when you think about an
Are
Excel,
you going to provide in the technical statistical analysis that was provided to you, presumably by a competent firm, you're going to perform some simple type of analysis so that a layperson could look at your text and look at the numbers and understand what the gap study says, rather than some of the mysterious things that we see in traffic engineering reports that seem to come to conclusions that appear to be counterintuitive
well, that's why
to the layman.
I can certainly provide you with a couple of figures that sum up the gap study.
It would at least be helpful to me, but, and maybe some of the neighbors who would like to take a look at it.
Certainly.
And so let me ask the pertinent question. Pray tell, when are you going to have this gap study and your brief analysis?
Well, I could email you the actual study tonight.
Okay.
The
And
analysis.
how about your analysis by next Monday?
Would you like me to bring it with me?
I'd like, if you could, I'd like to have you submit it in advance so that we could read it a few times and maybe save you some time if need be.
Sure.
And so that the public would have a chance to ask Mary to see it.
I can put that together for you.
That would be very helpful. Thank you.
You're
We
welcome.
appreciate that. Mr. Mullen,
We
yes.
got a little distracted on the bus stop question because
Yes,
we were talking about the asymmetrical cross-section and dropping the southbound lane, which I agree with you would solve the bus stop problem, at least as it accesses the site in that direction. But in the event that doesn't happen, I think it would be helpful to have an idea of how many children would be living in this, and therefore what the frequency of the bus stop would be. I know there's 90 units, 146 total bedrooms. Is there any way to project what we think the student age population would be, and therefore the need for the school bus, and then how many school buses there might be stopping there in the morning, particularly in the morning, but also in the afternoon? Because not only does the bus need to stop, but especially in the northbound direction, the kids need to get on the other side of the street. So they'll probably be stopping further south of the site, right?
Right, no,
Right.
that's true. I
So
mean, yeah.
I think there needs to be, and we don't have to do this now, but the bus stop factor, I think, we need some more information on that. And I want to, you know, understanding the school age mix is important because you've got elementary school and Pierce, and I don't know if they're busing to the high school now. I don't know that. I don't know anymore. But it would help. How many buses, where, and what we're thinking about frequency of stops on Randolph. And I imagine it stops there today. Imagine it does.
That's the big question.
Yeah, okay, all right.
But we had thought that, you know, that it's just a clarification we've been asking for and we finally got. We thought that, and my assumption was that the bus would pull into the site. And that's not the answer we got, that they won't. They don't go in on private property. So that sort of raises a huge concern. I mean, I have a bus stop across the house, across from my house in the morning. I see the kids in the afternoon. And, you know, the idea that a kid's gonna get off the bus and try to cross 4 lanes of traffic, either to go home or to go to Tedeschi's to get the absolute emergency, you know, Coke and something, is a real question. It's a real issue. And I don't know how you folks are gonna address it, but, and some place for kids to wait in bad weather. You know, as some people have said, well, my kid waits in my house and then the bus comes and I send them on out. Or in my case, there's like a line of SUVs every morning with kids in the SUV with the parents waiting for the bus. You're not gonna be able to do that. And so some kind of plan for how that's gonna happen, I think is gonna be a really critical issue.
Is it, thank you, Ms. O'Donnell, it's helpful. Is it your experience, Dr. Delaski, that school buses generally do not enter private property for the purpose, even with the private property owner's consent, to pick up and drop off students?
That's my understanding.
And
in
is
terms
it-
of liability.
That's what I was going to say. Is that principally a liability issue? And
Hitting a car, sliding down on ice and hitting a vehicle that's parked there, something like that, yes, a liability issue or concern.
any further questions? Jim, Jeffrey?
Just one point of
Yes.
clarification, if I may.
Yes, sir.
Regarding the driveway, NCHRP.
Yes.
So what happens typically, when you think about the Green Book gets updated every 5 or 6 years. And there are portions of the Green Book that never get covered. There are things that don't exist in the Green Book. And so TRB turns around and says, okay, give me a proposal on driveways, on stopping site distances, on passing site distances. So NCHRP realized that there was a deficiency in the fact that there's no data out there on driveway widths. And so that's what you have in front of you, NCHRP, is it 659, I believe. We can send you a PDF of that as well. That was what Mr. Burke was referring to earlier.
Yes. And is that a recognized,
It is recognized in the professional industry, and typically they're guidelines. Just like the Green Book, the
is
discretion.
it utilized in New England? It's not something that's utilized in?
50 states.
Okay, it's national.
50 states.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Then you're going to submit that with your package on,
We'll
before Monday?
send that
if you can
before,
do
how's that?
That'd be
That's an easy
terrific.
email.
Okay, that's great. We appreciate, thank you very much for coming. Mr. Casciano, do you have anything else to add here, or?
I do not.
Okay. So let's talk about Monday's hearing, and what we're going to accomplish on Monday's hearing. We're going to have some submittals by Mr. Delaski. You don't intend to be presenting any further evidence, do you, Mr. Casciano?
I don't think so. It's possible, you know, as we dig a little bit deeper in some of these issues, but as of now, we don't have a plan to present. We plan to submit a more formal submission to the board in the next couple of days, no later than Monday, as you requested, to provide a little more detail on the testimony you heard this evening. You know, I suspect you'll need some time to digest that as well, but, you know, we're here to accommodate and address, you know, any issues that the board may have on Monday.
Okay, and Ms. Schneider, you don't expect to be introducing any further evidence, do you?
No.
Other than written submittals or whatever? Okay. And Ms. O'Donnell, do you have any evidence that you'll want to be presenting, or?
I just actually had a quick question on the plans.
Sure.
I didn't see where you were showing like water and sewer lines. Have you shown those?
Oh, I can certainly ask, I will. Yes, that's right, yeah. I can- Yeah, but I think Katie wants to wait.
There's an existing water main, Randolph Ave on
But I'll
our
ask
gutter
her.
side, right in here. Existing sewer runs in the back of the properties here. And we'll be tapping the water off here and coming forward, and the sewer will be coming down the center.
And you're running that through the, sort of the pipes that you showed
Both
in
of-
the cross section?
They're gonna go underneath.
Oh, they're gonna go under, all the way underneath?
Yep. With the fill, I might be able to sneak the water over the top of the culvert, but the sewer definitely is going underneath.
Okay.
Great, thank you, Mr. Burke. Okay, so let me just ask counsel, in terms of the evidence may be ending on Monday, does anybody want to be heard making concluding statements, or do you just prefer not to do that and make written submissions? And if you do want written submissions to make them, then you'll have to pick a timeline, a date, perhaps on Monday. Give it some thought. But if you do want to be heard, if the evidence is going to end on Monday, my suggestion that we don't have very much to cover Monday. If you want to be heard, you'd probably be heard on Monday. Yes,
Mr. Chairman, we were just wondering whether or not the town's peer reviewers were.
I'm sorry, you're Karen, I'm sorry, I keep calling you Karen. I know a Karen Schneider. Johanna, would you please, yeah, so it'll be picked up on TV. Go ahead.
Sure. Thank you. We were wondering if the town's peer reviewers were going to have an opportunity to review and comment on what sounds like some significant revisions to what was originally proposed. I'm not trying to drag this out, and I know that the applicant is only intending on submitting, this week, and the hearing on Monday is coming up quite quickly thereafter, but it seems that it might be useful for the town's peer reviewers to.
It may be, the difficulty is the way this process is going. We'll be doing this in December, because we're going back and forth every time everyone tweaks it. I'm certainly happy to discuss that with my board members, but I'm not sure that's going to be possible here if the applicant is insisting on a June 19th final date for the evidence. I'm not sure they'll be able to get this type of report back to us in sufficient time, and I'm not sure that the changes that are being made here, I don't mean to prejudge them, that they're of great substance to the real principal material issues that are involved in this application. I think they're tweaking smaller issues rather than larger issues, but that's not my purview. Let me talk to my colleagues. Mr. Mullen, do you think we need to submit to this latest materials from Mr. Burke's firm and Mr. Delaskey's firm, for example, to our peer reviewers?
I think it might be helpful to have Turner look at it. Most of it is really responding to what Scott recommended. Especially, I don't know. I think the VAI work, probably not as important. As important as traffic has been in this hearing, most, I think, of what we're hearing in terms of the modifications, I think, are in response to the niche report. That's what I'm hearing. So, I'd be prepared to evaluate it without it, but I think it might be a little bit better to have Scott look at it.
Mrs. King, what do you have to say?
I'm more of the opinion that we can kind of make some judgments on what the changes were in relation to what the town's peer reviewers had suggested. So I don't think that it would be, and only because of the time, well, not only because of the time, but influenced by the time, I think there's a certain amount of extrapolations that we can make ourselves.
Well, I tend to agree with Mrs. King, to be frank about it, but I don't want to be obstinate.
the way with you know, we used to get along so well.
Well, we still get along very well. It's just a question of, at some point, these proceedings have got to end, and then Mr. Turner will make some...
sitting here.
Mr. Turner will make some comments, then Mr. Burke will want to come back and make some comments, and we'll be here in November. So I mean, I'm certainly willing to submit Mr. Burke's submittals to Mr. Turner if he has the ability to turn around comments within a relatively short period of time. But Monday is the 6th or 7th or 8th? What is that, the 8th? And so if Mr. Turner is going to take a week to do that, then we're in the 15th, and we're 3 days away from Doomsday here. And I'll tell you what, why don't we defer on that decision, because I respect your suggestions, particularly in this area. Why don't I talk with Mr. Turner and see from a planning perspective whether he has the time to do this additional work, and whether he thinks it's necessary. And we can certainly make that decision fairly quickly. And if he can do it, I'll recommend that he do it. The other problem is the cost to the town. I can see Ms. Conlon there. We're getting all kinds of engineering bills on this project that's ever changing, but I think it wouldn't be too costly an endeavor to have Mr. Turner take a quick look at it. So why don't I take the burden of talking to Mr. Turner, and we'll have a report whether he can do this when we come back on Monday. But and we'll see where that goes. But I think in terms of the proceedings on Monday, my question is whether the applicant and other counsel want to make closing statements, or whether you think that's not necessary here and you just want to make submittals, whether they're of a proposed decision, proposed conditions, whatever you want to submit in support of your client's position. To me, that seems like a preferable way of doing it, rather than having closing statements as if this was a trial. But on the other hand, if Mr. Caggiano was sat back there for many a day without saying things, so if you want to take the opportunity to be heard, we'll certainly accommodate you.
I think we do want one final opportunity to be heard. I think Monday is probably a little bit too early to do that. I'm not sure what the agenda then would be for Monday, if we weren't going to present on Monday. And I would suggest probably, I know it's pushing towards the 19th, but the following week as well. We are in conversations with some of the abutters. We'd like to develop those conversations a little bit further as well, to see how we may be able to mitigate impact to abutters as well. So we do have a few things sort of ongoing. So we need a little bit more time, and we'd like to be able to present as complete information as possible.
Okay, so let me do this. Let me ask, just in terms of procedures here, we had public speak at the last hearing, and I know Mr. Kingston, I think Attorney Paul Kingston, wanted to be heard this evening. Is there anybody other than Mr. Kingston, forget Ms. Connell at the present time, is there anybody present, a member of the public, who wants to be heard tonight, who hasn't had an opportunity to speak? So it looks like just Mr. Kingston. And Ms. Conlon, do you prefer to defer your comments until we have the attorneys making their statements? Evidence will still be open at that point in time.
Yes, with your permission, Mr. Chairman.
Sure,
I would
okay.
like to do that.
So does it make any sense not to be meeting on Monday? I honestly don't know what we'll accomplish, and to try to pick a date that's maybe 10 days away or something like that, that will be the final date of evidence for the hearing? I think that makes consummate sense, to be frank about it.
Yeah, I agree.
You agree with that, Mr. Casciano, that appearing here Monday is just costing everybody a lot of money with little to accomplish? All we're going to have is Mr. Delaskey's plans, which at best, I'm going to shoot off to a consulting peer reviewer.
All right, and then we'll be also submitting new plans and formal submissions to the issues of the items that Jim Burke had testified about tonight. So, I think if we did not have one Monday, that would give the board, as well as the public, more opportunity to review the updated plans and
Okay,
submissions.
I agree with that. Everyone in agreement? Ginny, are you in agreement? Okay, so here's what I think we should do. Mary has run off to secure her date book on scheduling. So, Mr. Kingston, would you like to be heard at the present time?
Yes, I'll be
Okay.
brief,
Why don't you come on up here and have a seat, Mr. Kingston, make yourself comfortable. Good to see you again, and welcome to the Board of Appeals.
Thank you very much. I'll introduce myself. My name is Paul Kingston, and
Where do you live, sir?
I live at 282 Highland Street, right above the proposed project. I've lived in Milton for over 42 years. And Ms. O'Donnell, I should acknowledge you as well, and members of the board. 3 married daughters who live in Milton, and 6 grandchildren who grew up in this town, so been around.
You have roots.
I have roots.
Yes, sir.
And
Congratulations.
Yeah. I'm not going to go over everything that's been said. That'd be too much repetition. But I do want to say, as far as I can detect, the neighbors are unanimously opposed to what I consider a massive project. They have spoken sincerely, in my view, and very forcefully and very truthfully, and I join with them for all the reasons that they have given. I have just one preliminary item comment on the traffic. Last fall, I was down, excuse me, at the DPW yard and happened to be talking with one of the people who worked there. I said, "What do you think about this project that's going to be going on?" He said, "I don't know how they're going to fit all those units and all those people." And he said, when we go out in the morning with our trucks, we no longer take a left going north on Route 28. We have to take a right. And when I look out my front window in the morning, I can confirm that that's what's happening. I see the DPW trucks going up Highland Street. So I think it confirms the concern of the neighbors that you've heard on Highland Street about the traffic and the people on Clifton Road and maybe down to Martin Road, et cetera, no question. But my main purpose here, members of the board, is to speak about a deed restriction. You're probably aware that there's a deed restriction involved here. About 10 years ago, my wife and I sold 2 acres of land to Christopher Quincy, who represented to me that he had plans for a Derby Street type project there. Grocery store, some boutique shops. And at the time, I had committed not to oppose the project and had committed not to disclose what he had told me about what the plans were until they became public. In any event, in the deed, we placed a restriction on we conveyed about 2 acres of land, and we put a restriction in the deed on 1 acre. In essence, the restriction, any parking structure that would serve a commercial enterprise, and the restricted area could only be used for single-family homes. Insofar as I've been able to determine, the present plan has parking spaces on that restricted area which I consider in violation of that restriction. I negotiated that restriction to protect myself and my neighbors. The restricted land runs between 268 Highland Street, which is the house my wife and I owned and occupied at the time. And that year, my wife and I conveyed that 268 property to my daughter and her family, and they still live there. My wife and I started to build a new house on the empty lot which was next to it, and that became 282 Highland Street. My wife passed away last July, so I'm living there now at 282 Highland Street. When we decided to build that house 10 years ago, we did it with the understanding that that restriction would have some teeth. We spent a lot of money building a new house. We had intentions of staying there for many, many years, understanding that we had that restriction and that we would be adequately protected and the neighbors would be adequately protected. Never did we dream that a development of this size would ever take place on that land. The only structures that we might have anticipated were single-family homes. And now we are faced with a multiple of about 90, I guess, in terms of the number of families who will be living in that area. As I reflect on all of the reasons the neighbors and others have given about the problems with this development, safety, traffic, density, wetlands, further burdening the town schools, the infrastructure concerns, I cannot grasp the reasonableness of this project. I find the reasons so many and so compelling, especially the public safety issue, that I think there's a moral duty on the part of this board to deny the application. I heard one speaker at the last meeting say there is no perfect place for a 40B project and only imperfect places. But this place is neither a perfect place or an imperfect place. It's the wrong place. There's no question, in my opinion. If I were on your board, Mr. Chairman, I could not in good conscience endorse this application as presented to you. I believe my rights and my neighbors' rights are being trampled on with this project. And I call on you to stop the project, which from every conceivable vantage point is ill-advised. It creates clear and present dangers, not only to the neighbors, but also to the people who will live in those proposed units. The entire project, in my opinion, is a distortion of a neighborhood which will be irrevocably destroyed and may well result in the loss of life with it. And I do not say that lightly or for the purpose of trying to be dramatic. I truly believe that. And with your permission, Mr. Chairman, I would like to submit a written legal opinion supplementing my remarks that I've made here tonight. And I thank you.
Thank you. Would appreciate that, Mr. Kingston. Let me just ask Mr. Caggiano a question, because this issue of the restriction on the property was in the beginning portions of the application, and it really hasn't received a lot of emphasis, and my recollection may be faulty. Because my recollection was that the project, while originally planning to utilize some of the restricted land, was in some way modified so as to not be on the restricted land or adversely affect the restricted land. And I guess my question to you is my recollection correct? And to what extent is the restricted land involved in this project, if at all?
The buildings are completely out of the restricted area.
Okay.
The parking lot is there.
The parking lot is on the restricted area?
That's right.
Okay.
But the parking lot doesn't violate the deed restriction, nor
Well,
do the buildings.
Mr. Kingston may think it
No,
does.
I
but-
understand that, but we have a difference of opinion on that.
Okay.
The deed
Mass
restriction was,
Housing has also looked at this issue as well, prior to issuing their project eligibility letter.
Okay,
I
that-
believe Mass Housing would tell you that they're not in the business of doing titles, so.
Sure. You know, they asked us for additional information and looked at it.
well, are you going to be submitting any legal opinion letter regarding the,
We did already, I believe in our initial submission was the project, the application that we submitted for the project eligibility letter, those materials, which included that.
which
Information-
included that the
information
land was
regarding the
being
deed
used for
restriction.
parking? But-
No, it included the discussion of the.
The deed restriction.
Right, and was there, were the legal citations and a legal argument as to the applicability of the, because I can go in and
believe
dig it
was
out, I
submitted,
just
But if
don't,
it's not, we can forward it to you.
I just don't remember it as being an issue of significance, and I'm glad Mr. Kingston brought it up, because it's been in the background, but has never been emphasized.
she agrees that it's a non-issue.
Yeah, yes, and does that include, Mr. Casciano, does that include your materials that you've submitted, a plan showing the restricted area according to the covenant that Mr. Kingston agreed to?
I'm not sure. Do our plans delineate the
Yes.
deed restricted area? They do?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'd also like to point out, Mr. Chairman, that if this deed restriction did apply or did have an impact on this property, that is a private land matter between private individuals and should not be something I would contend for the boards to
Well, how could you
consider.
lawfully park on the land if the restrictive covenant prevented it? Wouldn't that throw your parking count off?
Well, there's law that says that the board, when making decisions on comprehensive permits, are not allowed to make those decisions based on private land rights. So although you could grant a
You could
comprehensive
park,
permit.
you could park on Mr. Lombardi's backyard
So
using that
the-
type of
so the
argument. That doesn't
abutters-
make any sense to me.
So abutters have the right to appeal your decision regarding comprehensive permit, and that's when that issue would be raised at that point.
Well, why should Mr. Kingston have to go out and, he's a distinguished lawyer already, but why does he have to go out and retain Choate Hall and Stewart to bring an appeal that's going to cost him tens of thousands of dollars on a matter where you may have no
Sure, I don't.
lawful right? It doesn't make
You
any
know, I
sense
don't
to me.
have an answer to that. I didn't make the law. I'm just trying to suggest that there's a body of law out there that discusses this particular issue.
Okay, and
Yeah, we should see that. I mean, you know, you're under an obligation to provide evidence of site control. This is right on point, right? So I think we're mixing a couple of issues, and
please.
that's a different issue than whether or not you've got site control, which is really the issue that I think has been raised, so it would help to know a little bit more about that.
Sure, I'm happy to provide the information. However, also site control is something that's within Mass Housing's jurisdiction. And they've looked at the deed restriction, decided that we had adequate site control, and that's not properly within the purview of this board.
I disagree.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you got to have site control to get a permit from the Board of Appeals. So it seems to me to be elementary, but
So let's say within a reasonable time before our next hearing, will you be able to provide us with some materials on
Sure.
that? Okay, that's great. And Mr. Kingston, you can certainly supply us with any memorandum and
I appreciate that,
Plans that-
Mr. Chairman, and may I have access to the legal opinion, I think you say you submitted, Mr. Casciano?
I don't know that it's a legal opinion, it's...
it doesn't go that far.
It's more a generalized finding of site control. But well, I'll tell you, Mr. Kingston, whatever materials Mr. Casciano supplies to us, even though they may already be part of the record, and forgive us, we'll make sure that you get a copy of
I
that.
very much appreciate that.
Now, in terms of the continuance date, Ms. Fitzgerald is suggesting either the 15th or the 17th of June.
Either. Either. Either.
Why do I have the 16th down for Concom? That must be just a miss.
Do the
I just must
17th?
have put in the wrong date.
Looks like you put it in
Oh,
a week
okay.
later, which is why it wasn't in your calendar.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so I'm available either of those days.
17th.
Oh, 17th.
I'm free all of the dates.
Annie?
Wide open.
We're talking what, oh, I don't like to do the 18th, I mean, God forbid.
Yeah, I mean, what is it that we need to do by the 19th?
Well, you
We have to end the evidence.
End the
close the
evidence.
public hearing by
Okay.
the 19th.
Yes.
Although, seriously, you could always ask the applicant for, short extension of time of that time period. I mean,
Well,
it's not, it's not in cement. I mean,
But our
Well, it
evidence
is if
just,
the applicant
Yeah,
says
yes,
no,
no,
and the
but-
applicant has continued
But
to
if the
say.
the applicant's the one that's just submitted this information like on a Monday, for a Monday hearing, so, I think that Mr. Caggiano did say at another hearing that, if it was a short period of time, not 7 months.
Well,
that
He may
it
have.
was a short
You
period of time.
work that out between us. I'm not in the business of squeezing Mr. Caggiano. We've got a date here, and that's the statutory date,
Yeah.
and I'm happy to close the evidence before that date. If the parties want to
Yeah.
continue that for a month, or 2 weeks, or 2 days, that's fine, too.
We're available on the 17th.
Okay, but I think, Mrs. King, what are your preferred dates?
it's the 17th is fine.
How's the 17th for you? I'm free on the 17th. Mrs. Fitzgerald is collecting signatures, I think. We'll give her a second.
7 o'clock?
I think so.
Jenny, no way on the 15th or the 17th?
We're talking about the 17th.
Okay,
17th?
Jenny?
That's fine.
Okay, 17th.
Would that be here?
Yes.
Okay. And that'd be at 7 o'clock? Is that better? Okay, so we're going to adjourn until the 17th of June, 7 o'clock.
Mr. Chairman, I
Yes.
don't know whether my presence is required, but I would like to attend the next meeting, and I can't make the 17th.
What date could you make?
I could make the 15th, or the 18th, or the 16th.
I prefer not to go so close. I don't like the 18th date if just something happens
Okay,
and we,
the 18th anyway.
so,
The 16th, Board of Selectmen have already posted what they're meeting about on the 16th.
Board of Selectmen. Who cares?
So they wouldn't be able to attend.
Oh, you mean Mrs., oh, okay.
Well, what
Okay,
time
yeah.
is their meeting?
Katie, how about the 15th? Monday, the 15th?
It's fine.
15th.
Mr. Chairman, a couple members of the applicant's team are not available on the 15th.
Can
Time
somebody
is the
fill in?
selectmen's meeting, aren't they earlier?
I mean, if that's the only,
Yeah.
if that's the only date that everybody
It's kind of
else.
looking,
Okay.
that might be the only.
Let me ask you in terms of, is it the time that's bad or just the date?
It's the entire evening. I have a board that I sit on that's having its annual meeting that,
Okay, what time, may I ask what time the meeting is?
it starts at 5.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Sometimes we could start, do you know what time it ends?
It should be over by 8.
We'll be here.
Is it a distance from here or is
It's
it
in Brookline.
Brookline? It's not going to work for you. It's going to put you under too much pressure.
It will not work for me, but if it is really the only date that works for everybody else who matters here, I'm not going to hold up the process.
I think we have to do it on the 17th. Do you have a colleague that could,
I will find someone who can attend in my place.
okay, thank you very much. I appreciate your courtesy. So we're going to adjourn this hearing till June 17th at 7 o'clock in this,
Yes.
okay, in the Blue Conference Room. We're still expecting Mr. Dulaski's materials and Mr. Burke's materials on, let's put them on Monday. And I will talk with Mr. Burke. He may not be able to be present on the 17th. He may not even be able to do it. We'll just play it by ear. But
Mr. Turner.
anything else?
You mean Mr. Turner?
Yes, what did I say?
Mr. Burke.
Mr. Burke, yes, Mr. Burke, he'd be available. Mr. Turner, we'll just play it by ear whether we can get a response in, but that's going to be it, folks. And Ms. Conlon, is that good for you? The 17th, is that a good date for you? And so we'll certainly reserve whatever time you need to be heard, because the evidence will still be open. Okay, great. Okay, so with all of that, thank you very much for coming tonight. Thanks for your participation. We're adjourned until the 17th of June, 7 o'clock, Blute Conference Room. Thank you.